Zack Snyder has released the director's cut, the R-rated versions of Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2, and I watched both of them. I need to wash my mouth out with soap. That just hurts to say. I have become one of the preeminent experts on disliking Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2. I hate-watched it to a level that is genuinely unhealthy. I actually watched Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, twice. The second time was out of spite to prove a point, where I went through and painstakingly documented every single instance of slow-mo to get the exact amount of time that the film spins in slow motion, which is a curse I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. I also thoroughly explained the scenes that slow motion was used in, because it's just an egregious amount used for no reason most of the time in the movie. Zack Snyder has become infamous for how much slow-mo he uses, and in Rebel Moon, he doesn't even use it to emphasize cool shit. He just seems to randomly use it to fill some type of sick fetish. Like maybe he signed a deal with the devil, and part of the contract was he has to include an extreme amount of slow motion in his movies, so he just pads the time with it. I'll go ahead and spoil the analytics for you here, I guess. So, from my calculations, when I went through and timestamped everything, it came out to 20 minutes and 56 seconds of Rebel Moon Part 2 is spent purely in slow motion, and sometimes the slow-mo goes 2 layers deep, where a slow motion scene will actually slow itself down for even more intense slow-mo, which drags it out even further. And like I said, he just randomly puts slow motion in these movies for no reason, so it's not even used in action scenes a lot of the times. So in Part 2, a lot of slow motion is used when they're farming. Slow motion farming. When they're like taking a scythe to some hay, or if they're just throwing some grain, there's a lot of slow motion tossing of grain. So if you're someone who's very enthusiastic about watching bags of grain get thrown through the air in very slow speeds, your wishes have been answered with Rebel Moon Part 2. Zack Snyder's got you covered. But anyway, on to the R-rated version. This is supposed to be like the definitive Snyder cut. This is his original vision. Apparently what he did is he filmed Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2 as R-rated films, but then chopped them up to be PG-13 for Netflix, which I think makes no sense because it's not like you went to theaters, you went to streaming, and it's not like R-rated movies flop on streaming. Like, you could have just released the definitive cut. And now after seeing it, it's very clear that a lot was missing from Part 1 and 2, which led to the narrative being a lot weaker in what he put out. I don't know why Zack Snyder can't just release the complete version of his films the first time around. Instead, he has to double dip with a fucking follow-up cut. But I do want to make it clear, the R-rated director's cut version doesn't save either one of these films. They're still not good, but they are better. So let's start with Rebel Moon Part 1 director's cut. I wrote some notes here, so that way I didn't miss anything. There does seem to be quite a few changes well, not changes. Everything that was in the original cut is still there, so all the slow motion is still just such a fucking headache. But some of the things that were added was a lot of gore, a lot of blood, guts, and titties. And he made sure to order it with extra titty. He randomly inserts boobies here like he uses them for jump scares. I guess he really wanted to make sure to use every possible element of an R rating he could think of, but couldn't think of ways to naturally include nudity, so he just decided to just haphazardly throw it in here for some reason. And he makes sure to include some more fucks, of course. But anyway, the intro sequence to Rebel Moon Part 1 I actually thought was pretty solid. The blood and gore do help enhance the action a little bit, but the way Zack Snyder uses it makes it very reminiscent of the live-action Death Note, if you remember that on Netflix a long time ago, where people would just explode all the time like they were just these giant meat balloons that were one, like, small needle poke away from just blowing up into intestines flying over the place and blood splattering across the screen. That's how Zack Snyder uses it in this movie. So if someone gets shot, their whole fucking arm flies off and you got like fingers and bones popping out all over the place. You know, people getting shot in the face and all of a sudden their brain matter shoots out all over the place. Or someone gets shot in the shoulder and it pops their butthole out of their shoulder. Like, it's actually comical. Like, seeing someone get stabbed or shot and then just having all of their limbs explode off of them actually had me giggling a little bit. It does make the action a bit cooler, but kind of in like a silly way, if that makes sense. So, like, an example. Whenever someone uses a knife, like even just like a normal knife, they'll stab someone, and then when they take the knife out, it's this eruption of blood. Like, it's like a whole fountain of blood shoots out of them. It's so over the top that it is entertaining. But I don't know if it's on purpose, or if Zack Snyder really just thought it was cool that if someone gets like a paper cut, all of a sudden the blood shoots out like a geyser, like a volcano erupting into blood. I did like it though. Like I said, it is entertaining, but it is just kind of comical. Anytime someone gets shot, you bet your sweet bippy there's body parts getting blown off of them in every which way. But it certainly helps this movie be less boring, because Jesus Christ, the original Rebel Moon Part 1, almost impossible to stay awake for. Same with Part 2. These are snooze fest movies. So the R rating does help because you'll be dozing off because of terrible exposition and horrible writing, and then all of a sudden someone steps on a nail and their whole foot blows off and hits the screen and there's blood dripping all over the screen, and you're like, oh, alright, I'm awake again. I keep going off on tangents here. I just have a whole lot to say about it because it's something special. So back to the intro sequence. I do enjoy it, but man, oh man, it's pretty fucking dumb. I wrote a couple things down. So like, there's this little alien that's in a cage, and there are some people running away as the mother world is coming after them. Everything's gone to shit, and the mother world's here wreaking havoc on this planet, about to just obliterate everyone and everything. And there's this family that's running away, and they have this little alien in a cage. Well, the alien gets dropped, and then the lead guy of the scene picks up the little alien, and he says, "They want to hurt her. I'm sorry." And then the alien, it's like this cute little CGI thing. He's like, okay. Well, he doesn't say okay, but he's like nodding his head like he understands this is a dire situation. So the little alien guy starts hopping around, and it's like an adorable little creature. I was rooting for him. And then he stands in front of the soldiers that are invading their world, and he does this. And then blows up. The little alien guy explodes. He just blows himself up like Voltorb casting self-destruct and takes out, I don't know, like 20 soldiers or something, which ultimately does nothing because then just another wave of soldiers come in and murder the family and take their son to turn him into a soldier. And during this scene, Zack Snyder makes it immediately clear that there's gonna be boob. Come hell or high water, hunkers will arrive. So during this invasion, randomly, there's just like some women that are getting taken by the soldiers, and they're taking their clothes off. Like just leaving them bare ass naked and then branding them. And they do that for like 2 or 3 women. And then that's never touched on again. It's just there to illustrate like, oh, these are some like really evil people. But it's an entirely unnecessary thing to include. He's already fully established that this group is not good. They're a bunch of jerks, to say the least. Pardon my French. Like, he didn't need to do that. Like, we're watching a war, and we're watching the general do some fucked up garbage with this family, and then randomly it's like, okay, now take her clothes off. Do it now. It's like, what the fuck, Zach? Like, I get it's R-rated, but that scene didn't add anything. It was just weird. It was just like a weird thing to include, in my opinion. It really just feels like there are some moments that just come out of nowhere. Again, like the little alien doing a Chaozu impression from Dragon Ball, where like Chaozu grabs onto Nappa and blows up. That's exactly what the little alien did for no reason. And I just really get that impression that a lot of things happen here for no reason, just because he wanted to make sure people knew this is an R-rated movie. So when we first go to the farm planet, when they're on Velt, the first fucking thing we see here, I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure I got the quotes right. So they're in this village, they're in this hall, and they're talking about the upcoming harvest. And the head of the community says that the optimal way to ensure a successful, good harvest is everyone going and having sex. Like, everyone's just super horny. It's like a giant orgy community is like the first impression you get of it. He says verbatim, "Fuck hard tonight. Fuck for the harvest." Those are his exact words. Like, it's so horny for no reason. And then right after that, they play some, like, music in the hall to get everyone, like, ready to go have sex for the harvest. And then our main character, Cora, or Arthaleus, she then goes and has sex with a dude that looks like Hugh Jackman. He's also in the second movie, but I keep forgetting his name. I'm pretty sure it's Din. And the sex scene lasts for so long. It is such a long, uncomfortable scene. Like, it drags for a long time. I'm shocked there wasn't slow-mo used during the sex scene. Like, I think Zack Snyder thought he was shooting porn at this point. Like, it totally loses the plot. It didn't need to be that long. And, you know, it's full nudity and everything, but, like, it doesn't add anything. Like, what? At no point in the rest of the film or in the second film does having sex for the harvest come up. It's just in this director's cut in the very beginning of this film, and I just don't get why. It's just because he seems to want another excuse to show honkers. Like, he just wants to have yams out at all times, I guess. But it's more than just the sex and blood that gets added to the director's cut. He added a lot of lore. So lore that really should have been there in the PG-13 version is there in this version. It's not like there's profanity or anything used in it, and there's not like gore for some of these scenes. There are just like actual world building elements in the director's cut that weren't there in the PG-13 cut, and I don't understand why. I don't get why. I got a lot more about the universe in the director's cut than I ever did in the first one. Though it doesn't help with character development, it doesn't help flesh out any characters at all. The lore bits that get added here, the tiddlywinks of lore that get included, are for the bigger scale of the world, which is helpful, obviously, but it still suffers from the same problem the PG-13 cuts do, where the characters are still so fucking flat and have no depth to them whatsoever. That was not fixed in the director's cut of these movies. And some of those scenes are actually really cool. Like, I've always said, Zack Snyder has some really cool set pieces and cool moments, but he can't write for shit. Across, what, 7 hours and 2 movies, he has failed to do what some TV shows capture in a single episode, making you care about the characters and the universe. He still hasn't done that, even with those director's cuts now, in my opinion. But there are some really cool scenes. He just needs to surround himself with some writers that can actually breathe life into this, and he can just focus on some cool shots, cool action. Like, that's what he is best at. I don't know why he doesn't just bring in some writing talent to help him realize these things. But anyway, I want to talk some more about some of the new additions to Rebel Moon Part 1. So, when they first meet Kai, it's pretty different here. So, they go to a brothel, because, of course, I mean, hey, R-rated Rebel Moon, baby. So they all go to a brothel, and things kind of play out similarly to the PG-13 cut when they first meet Kai and everything. However, there's a couple of things that are different. There's like a nipple robot that has some screen time for some reason, and when they leave the brothel, the nipple robot is shown coming out and then like looking in their direction. So I was actually led to believe we were about to get like a whole new DLC character here with the nipple robot, but you never see them again in the rest of that movie or in the second movie. So I don't really know what the point of the nipple robot was. Maybe just because it looked cool? Maybe? I don't really know. Anyway, though, aside from just that, there is an alien pervert who tries to have sex with Gunner. So he was trying to purchase Gunner for some sex, which gets shut down saying, hey, thanks for the offer, bub, but I'll have to pass. And then the alien pervert grabs his meat, like actually gives him the old dick twist. And for some reason, that actually, like, they hold that for a little while. So he's just there, like, fondling his balls. And I wrote down the line he says because it was a doozy. I actually rewound it so that way I could catch all of it. He said, I'm gonna fuck that pretty pink hole on his face. Bravo. Now that's cinema. Wow. Wow. That is Insano-style dialogue right there. But you should expect nothing less from Rebel Moon director's cut, baby. The gloves are off. I'm not just going to keep focusing on some of the weird new scenes here. It's no point in doing that. If you already had no interest in watching Rebel Moon, the director's cut isn't going to do anything to get you interested, or if you already tried it and didn't like it, it doesn't do anything to make you like it more. I do think it is better, but it's also hard to have been worse. It's 3 hours and 24 minutes, so it's obviously a big time investment. You gotta set aside like a whole fucking afternoon to watch it in one sitting. But the blood and gore do add to it. I appreciate the new lore that they added with some of the scenes. And I also really liked what they did with the Dreadnought. So that really cool design with that face that has like all the tubes running in it and running out of it, which kind of powers the entire Dreadnought. They actually built a lot around that in Part 1 and Part 2. A lot is very generous, but they built around that quite a bit. That set up something very big in the universe. So that is like the engine of the ship, and it's sentient. It's alive. It's kind of like this being that they've trapped and forced to power their ship for, like, you know, these hyperspace jumps. And it cries. And Arthaleus is able to kind of connect with it, and we get a lot of lore about it in part 2. And it's pretty interesting, actually. So there's a reference to her sisters that she believes will be woken up by Arthaleus after blowing her up. But it sets up this idea that there are beings like this, capable of like crazy cosmic powers that we might see down the line. So that's pretty cool. I did like that, and I was pretty interested in that. But anyway, let's just move on to part 2. So part 2, it doesn't actually have a lot different about it. A lot of what's different in part 2 is just blood and gore. I didn't notice too many additional scenes. Part 1 I noticed quite a bit had changed, but part 2 stayed relatively the same. So the only new scenes I noticed were obviously the stuff I was talking about with the ship's engine, and then a couple of sex scenes. So, like, there's another really long sex scene with Arthaleus and Gunnar. They're switching positions. They're hitting every position in the book. They're running through the entire Kama Sutra's worth of every possible sex position. It goes on for so fucking long. Lots of moaning. Totally unnecessary. It's just uncomfortably long again. And then there's like another pseudo sex scene towards the end of the movie where we abruptly cut to Tarek and some woman post-coitus, and she sits up in bed and her breasts are just out. And Tarek looks at her and then like at her milkers, and we just hold on this scene for like 40 seconds. There's like no talking or anything, and then it just abruptly cuts back to them getting ready for the upcoming fight. It comes out of nowhere. It leads to nothing. It does nothing. I don't know who that woman was. Like, it makes no sense. Again, this just feels like Zack Snyder randomly inserting titties as much as he can. I don't know what the idea was behind it. Maybe there's a deeper message there that I missed. I'm too stupid to pick up on it. But it just seems so stupid. And then there's also another set of additional scenes where there's this group of aliens that is spying on them. So I wrote down their names. I think they're called Hawkshaws. And what they're doing is they're spying on them with these binoculars and reporting back to the Dreadnought. But it doesn't change anything. So in the PG-13 cut, everything still plays out exactly the same in the director's cut here. But the Hawkshaws are now spying on them this whole time, and it doesn't change the outcome. Nothing gets altered. They're only there a couple of times and don't add anything. They then notice that the heroes have a dropship, and right when they're about to report that to the Dreadnought, which would actually change how the story played out, they get killed by the robot. So ultimately, their scenes are completely useless. It actually felt like those scenes were filmed after the PG-13 version as just a way of putting some new stuff in the R-rated version. Like, because it doesn't contribute anything. We don't learn anything about the Hawkshaws or anything, and they don't actually matter at all. So it just feels like a completely worthless side quest that's there for no reason. And that's how I feel about a couple other scenes in part 2. They just don't lead to anything. It just feels like they're spliced in there, but don't directly tie into the plot. Like, they're isolated in their own thing that doesn't actually affect the timeline. It's just, I don't get the point, really. So that was kind of stupid, but that's another new addition to the director's cut. The bulk of the new stuff in part 2 director's cut is just extended action scenes with more blood and gore, and a couple of additional action scenes with more blood and gore. Which is cool, like, it helps. It makes the final fight more interesting, that's for damn sure. So the final fight, some of the slow-mo doesn't look nearly as goofy in the director's cut version as the PG-13 version, because in the PG-13 version, they'd have a slow-motion scene of someone just like falling off a bridge for 6 uninterrupted seconds and nothing's really changing, whereas here, that same scene now has like some body parts flying around, and like some blood going in this direction and a couple of other things happening in the back. So it is more interesting. It does help, but it doesn't save the movie. I still think Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2 are not worth watching. They're just not very good. But if Zack Snyder had just released these complete versions the first time around, the Rebel Moon series wouldn't be nearly as much of a joke as it is right now. Because at the very least, they're not as boring. Just straight up, they're not as boring anymore. The enhanced action sequences do help in that regard. Now he just needs to bring in some writers. Maybe he'll do that for Part 3. Who knows? But yeah, I do think the director's cuts are better versions of Rebel Moon Part 1 and 2. But I still think I just wasted like 7 hours watching these. I would love if Zack Snyder could just release the full, complete version the first time around. It'd be so much better. So that way I wouldn't have to watch Rebel Moon Part 1 twice and Rebel Moon Part 2 3 fucking times. But yeah, I mean, I didn't have to do that, but I did anyway. That's about it. See ya.